I'm 29 years old, Seraphina, the accountant who left my small hometown 5 years ago to build my career. Everyone thought I was the responsible one, always doing the right thing, including sending money back to help my struggling family. What no one knew was how much it hurt when my parents constantly compared me to my golden child brother Jackson. Last Thanksgiving, I finally stood up for myself when they laughed about me never measuring up to him. That's when I discovered the shocking truth about all the money I'd been sending home. Before I share how I finally stood up to my family, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt unappreciated by the people closest to you. I grew up in Millfield, a small Midwestern town where everyone knew each other's business. My father, Robert, owned the only hardware store in town, and my mother, Diana, was a former beauty queen who never let anyone forget it. Our family looked perfect from the outside. Successful local business, beautiful home, 2 children. But inside those walls, there was a clear hierarchy, and I was firmly at the bottom. My brother Jackson was 3 years older than me and seemed to effortlessly embody everything my parents valued. He was naturally athletic, charming, and could talk his way into or out of anything. From the moment he joined the Little League baseball team at age 7, my parents' world revolved around his games, his trophies, his potential. I was different. Quieter, more serious, with a head for numbers and details that no one seemed to notice or care about. While Jackson was scoring touchdowns on the football field, I was acing advanced math classes. While he was being crowned homecoming king, I was winning regional debate competitions. The favoritism was obvious in 100 small ways every day. In our living room, an entire wall was dedicated to Jackson's sports trophies, medals, and team photos. My academic certificates and honor roll mentions were tucked away in a drawer somewhere if they were kept at all. Why can't you be more like your brother, Ka, and became the soundtrack of my childhood? If I brought home an A minus, my father would say Jackson never had to study to get good grades. If I struggled to make friends, my mother would sigh, your brother had dozens of friends at your age. The comparisons were relentless and always left me feeling inadequate. The inequality extended to everything. When Jackson needed new football equipment, my father would drive 2 hours to find the best gear money could buy. When I needed new school supplies, my mother would remind me to be frugal and practical. Family vacations were planned around Jackson's tournament schedules. My piano recitals were often missed because they conflicted with his games. Even our birthday celebrations showed the disparity. Jackson's birthdays featured elaborate parties with all his friends' custom cakes and expensive gifts. Mine were afterthoughts, often celebrated a few days late if something more important, meaning something related to Jackson, came up. I developed coping mechanisms early. If I couldn't win their approval through normal channels, I would become so academically successful they couldn't ignore me. I threw myself into schoolwork, staying up late to ensure every assignment was perfect. I joined clubs and volunteered, building a resume that would eventually be my ticket out of there. It wasn't until 8th grade that I realized our family dynamic wasn't normal. Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher, called me in after class one day to discuss an essay I'd written about family expectations. Seraphina, she said gently, the way you described your parents' treatment of you and your brother, that's not how it should be. Parents should celebrate each child's unique strengths. Her words stunned me. I'd always assumed the problem was me, that if I could just be more like Jackson, I'd be worthy of the same love and attention. The idea that my parents were wrong had never occurred to me. High school widened the gap between my brother and me. While I was taking AP classes and planning for college, Jackson's grades were slipping. His athletic performance was still stellar, but his academic future looked increasingly uncertain. Yet my parents remained oblivious, continuing to treat him like the golden child while overlooking my achievements. When I was accepted to all 7 colleges, I applied to including 3 Ivy League schools. My mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you see Jackson scored the winning touchdown last night?" The contrast was painful, but it fueled my determination. If I couldn't win their approval, I would build a life so successful they couldn't help but acknowledge it. Education became my escape route, and I focused on it with single-minded intensity. What I didn't realize then was that my academic success was setting the stage for an even more complicated family dynamic in the years to come, one that would eventually force me to choose between my own well-being and the family role I'd been assigned since childhood. By senior year, I had already mapped out my future: a business degree, followed by an accounting certification, then a job at a prestigious firm. My guidance counselor told me I was one of the most organized and determined students she'd ever met. What she didn't understand was that this wasn't just ambition, it was survival. Every A on my report card, every leadership position, every scholarship was another step away from the shadow of my brother and the house where I'd never quite measured up. My hard work paid off when I received a full scholarship to Westridge University, one of the top business schools in the country. The day the letter arrived, I ran home bursting with excitement, the first time I'd felt truly proud of myself in years. "Mom, Dad, I got a full ride to Westridge," I announced, holding up the letter with trembling hands. My father glanced up from his newspaper. "Westridge, that's in Chicago, right? Pretty far from home." My mother nodded absently. "That's nice, honey. Did you know Jackson's coach thinks he might get scouted for a sports scholarship?" Just like that, my moment was gone, replaced by another conversation about Jackson's potential. I retreated to my room, clutching my acceptance letter like a lifeline. This would be my escape, 500 miles between me and the constant reminder of my inadequacy. Jackson did get a sports scholarship to State University just 30 miles from home. My parents were ecstatic, already planning weekend trips to see his games. Meanwhile, I prepared for my move to Chicago alone, researching bus routes and dorm supplies without any help. College was transformative. For the first time, I was judged solely on my own merits, not in comparison to anyone else. My analytical skills and work ethic, previously overlooked at home, became assets in the classroom. Professors noticed me, classmates respected me, and I slowly began to build confidence in who I was. During freshman orientation, I met Alicia and Jordan, two other accounting majors who became my first real friends. They came from supportive families and were shocked when I casually mentioned some of my experiences growing up. "Wait, your parents actually said that to you?" Alicia asked after I recounted one particularly painful memory. "That's not okay, Seraphina. You know that, right?" Their validation was like water in a desert. I'd spent so long questioning my own worth that hearing others confirm the unfairness of my situation was both painful and healing. In my sophomore year, I met Professor Martinez, who would become my mentor. After I earned the highest grade on his notoriously difficult tax accounting midterm, he asked me to stay after class. "Miss Winters, that was exceptional work," he said. "Have you considered applying for our department's competitive internship program next summer?" No one had ever taken such an interest in my future before. Under Professor Martinez's guidance, I applied for and secured an internship at one of Chicago's top accounting firms. While my classmates were excited about summer break, I was excited about 60-hour work weeks and real-world experience. Meanwhile, Jackson was struggling at State. Without my parents' constant oversight, his grades slipped below what was required to maintain his scholarship. The phone calls home became more frequent, with my mother asking if I could possibly tutor him remotely. "He's just having trouble adjusting," she explained. "You've always been so good with schoolwork. Can't you help your brother?" I tried scheduling weekly video calls to review his assignments, but Jackson rarely showed up. After the third missed session, he texted, "Sorry sis, had a party. Coach says I'm improving though." By the end of his sophomore year, Jackson lost his scholarship completely. Rather than taking out loans or getting a part-time job like most students would, he dropped out and moved back home. My parents, instead of holding him accountable, made excuses. The professors just didn't understand his learning style. My father insisted during one of our rare phone conversations. "He's thinking about starting his own business anyway. College isn't for everyone." The summer after my junior year, I landed another prestigious internship that turned into a part-time job during my senior year. I was already building my career while still in school, saving every penny and planning my permanent move to Chicago after graduation. When graduation day arrived, I had mixed feelings about my parents attending. Part of me wanted them to see what I'd accomplished. Another part dreaded the inevitable comparisons to Jackson. They did come, sitting awkwardly in the audience as I received my diploma with highest honors. At the small celebration lunch afterward, my father spent most of the time talking about Jackson's new business idea, selling customized sports equipment online. He needed startup capital, and my father was considering taking out a second mortgage on the house to fund it. "Isn't that risky?" I asked, concerned. The hardware store hasn't been doing that well lately, has it? My mother waved away my concerns. Your brother has such vision. We have to support him while he's finding his way. I wanted to ask who had supported me while I was finding my way, but I swallowed the words. This was supposed to be a happy day, and I'd long since learned that challenging the Jackson-centered family narrative only led to conflict. A week after graduation, I accepted a full-time position at Warren & Associates, one of Chicago's most respected accounting firms. The starting salary was impressive for a new graduate, and the job came with potential for advancement. I found a small but decent apartment in the city and began my new life. The distance provided clarity. With each passing month away from home, I could see more clearly how dysfunctional our family dynamics had been. Phone calls with my parents became less frequent, usually initiated by me, and often ending with subtle guilt trips about not visiting more often. What I didn't know then was that these early years of independence were setting the stage for an even more complicated entanglement with my family, one that would take years and a painful confrontation to unravel. My first years in Chicago were exhilarating and exhausting. Entry-level accounting positions aren't glamorous. They involve long hours, meticulous attention to detail, and a steep learning curve. But I thrived on the challenge, arriving early, staying late, and absorbing everything I could about the business. My apartment was small, a studio with barely enough room for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. No one comparing me to anyone else, no one diminishing my accomplishments, no one making me feel like I was perpetually falling short. For the first time, I could just be Seraphina. 6 months into my job at Warren & Associates, I was assigned to help with tax preparation for several major clients. My supervisor, impressed by my thoroughness, began requesting me specifically for his projects. By the end of my first year, I'd received a modest raise and glowing performance reviews. Then came the first call from home that would change everything. The store isn't doing well, my father admitted, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. With the big home improvement chain that opened on the highway, we've lost nearly half our customers. We're struggling to make the mortgage payment this month. My stomach tightened. That sounds serious. Have you talked to the bank about restructuring the loan? Banks don't care about small business owners like us, he replied. Seraphina, I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, but could you possibly help us out just until we get back on our feet? I hesitated. My savings were minimal, and Chicago's cost of living consumed most of my salary. But they were my family, and despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of them losing their home. I can send something, I said finally. Maybe $500? That's really all I can spare right now. The relief in my father's voice was palpable. That would help tremendously. It's just temporary, I promise. Things will turn around soon. That evening, I transferred the money, adjusting my budget to accommodate the loss. I'd have to skip a few dinners out with colleagues and postpone buying the winter boots I needed, but it felt like the right thing to do. What I didn't know then was that this temporary assistance would become a monthly expectation. 2 weeks later, my mother called about their past due electric bill. The month after, it was car repairs. Each time I transferred what I could, tightening my own budget accordingly. Around this time, Jackson launched his sports equipment business. My parents spoke about it with almost religious reverence during our occasional calls. He's got such entrepreneurial spirit, my mother gushed. The website looks so professional. What they didn't mention, what I discovered much later, was that they had indeed taken out a second mortgage to fund his venture, and that the business was hemorrhaging money from day one. As my career progressed, so did the financial requests from home. When I received my first significant promotion and salary increase, I mentioned it during a call with my mother. 2 days later, my father called asking if I could increase my monthly contribution since I was doing so well now. I agreed, partly out of guilt and partly because I still craved their approval. The amount I sent home each month crept up from $500 to $800, then to $1,200. Meanwhile, I remained in my tiny studio apartment, postponed vacations, and bought clothes from thrift stores while my parents continued to bail out Jackson's failing businesses. After his sports equipment website folded, Jackson tried a lawn care service, then a food delivery app, then a custom t-shirt company. Each venture followed the same pattern. Initial excitement, significant investment from my parents, declining interest from Jackson as challenges arose, then eventual abandonment for the next big idea. Through social media, I caught glimpses of Jackson's life that contradicted the struggling entrepreneur narrative my parents presented. There he was at a Miami beach resort. There was his new truck. There was the expensive watch he got from a business contact. Meanwhile, my parents continued to claim desperate financial straits requiring my support. The cognitive dissonance was becoming harder to ignore, but years of family conditioning had taught me that questioning the Jackson-centered reality was futile and painful. So I continued to send money, continued to live below my means, continued to prioritize their needs over my own. 2 years into this arrangement, I met Ryan at a friend's birthday gathering. He was smart, kind, and refreshingly direct. On our third date, when I had to cancel dinner plans because an emergency call from my parents necessitated an immediate money transfer, he asked the question no one had posed before. "Seraphina, do you think it's possible your family is taking advantage of you?" I bristled immediately. "You don't understand. They're struggling. The store isn't doing well." Ryan treaded carefully. "I understand wanting to help family, but from what you've told me, this has been going on for years, and your brother doesn't seem to be contributing at all." "Jackson has different strengths," I replied, automatically reciting the family line. But something about saying it out loud to someone who hadn't been conditioned to accept it made the words sound hollow. As our relationship deepened, Ryan's gentle questioning helped me begin to see the situation more clearly. After each phone call from home left me anxious and depleted, he would hold space for my feelings while also noting the pattern. When a promotion I'd worked hard for was met with immediate requests for more money rather than congratulations, he pointed out the imbalance. The breaking point came when I discovered through a mutual hometown acquaintance that Jackson had purchased a new car, a luxury model that cost more than I made in a year, while my parents were telling me they couldn't afford their property taxes. Shaken, I finally made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Lindsay helped me understand that what I'd experienced growing up was a form of family scapegoating, with Jackson as the golden child, and me as the responsible one expected to sacrifice for everyone else. "This dynamic doesn't change unless someone refuses to play their assigned role," she explained. "Your financial support is enabling patterns that are harmful to everyone involved, including your brother, who's never had to face consequences for his choices." Over several months of therapy, I began to understand that true family support flows in multiple directions. What I had with my parents and Jackson wasn't mutual aid. It was exploitation cloaked in family obligation. As this realization solidified, I made a decision. The next time I visited home, I would confront the situation directly. I would set boundaries about money. I would reclaim my role as a daughter and sister, not a personal bank. What I couldn't have anticipated was how this decision would uncover an even deeper deception than I'd imagined, one that would forever change my understanding of my family and my place within it. I planned my visit home for Thanksgiving nearly 2 years since I'd last seen my family in person. The distance had been both geographical and emotional, our communication limited to brief phone calls that inevitably turned to discussions of money. Ryan supported my decision, but worried about me facing my family alone. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" he asked as he helped me pack. "I need to do this myself," I explained. "Having you there might give them another target or distraction." What I didn't say was that I was ashamed for him to witness firsthand the dysfunction I'd described. The 5-hour drive to Millfield gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I wanted to say. I would be calm but firm. I would express love while establishing boundaries. I would offer financial planning help instead of direct support. The script seemed reasonable and fair in the quiet of my car. Reality, however, rarely follows our carefully planned scripts. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it had throughout my childhood, a well-maintained colonial with a manicured lawn projecting success and stability to the outside world. The familiar knot in my stomach formed as I pulled into the driveway. My mother opened the door before I could knock, embracing me with a perfumed hug that felt more performative than affectionate. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "You've lost weight. Are you eating properly? And your hair, when did you cut it so short?" Before I could answer, my father appeared, giving me a brief pat on the shoulder. The prodigal daughter returns Jackson look, who's finally here. And there was my brother emerging from the kitchen with a beer in hand, looking more like our father than ever. At 32, Jackson still had the easy confidence that had defined him since childhood, though his former athletic physique had softened somewhat. "Hey, financial wizard," he said with a wink. "Slumming it with the small-town folks this weekend?" The casual dig was so familiar that I almost didn't register it. This was how it had always been, subtle undermining wrapped in joviality, positioning me as the outsider who thought she was better than everyone else because I'd moved away. I soon discovered that Jackson was living with our parents temporarily while getting his newest business venture off the ground, a local sports bar concept he assured everyone would be a hit. He had the entire basement to himself, converted into what my mother proudly called his bachelor pad, complete with a large-screen TV and gaming setup that must have cost thousands. That first evening was a masterclass in avoidance. Every time I tried to bring up finances, my mother changed the subject. When I mentioned that I'd been sending a significant portion of my income home for years, my father suddenly remembered an urgent email he needed to check. Jackson made himself scarce whenever conversations turned serious. The next day was Thanksgiving. I woke early, finding my mother already in the kitchen preparing the turkey. Without being asked, I fell into my old role of helper, chopping vegetables and preparing side dishes, while Jackson remained in the basement playing video games, and my father watched the parade on TV. "Jackson's been under a lot of stress with the business planning," my mother explained when I asked if he might help with dinner. "He needs his downtime." I bit my tongue, remembering Dr. Lindsay's advice to choose my battles carefully. The financial discussion was my priority. Kitchen duties were secondary. By the time we sat down to dinner at 3 o'clock, I had been cooking for 6 hours. The table was perfect, the food abundant, and the conversation centered entirely around Jackson's sports bar concept. "The location is ideal," my father explained enthusiastically. "Right near the highway exit. It's going to put Millfield on the map." I nodded politely, waiting for a natural opening to share my own news. When there was finally a lull in the Jackson-centric conversation, I spoke up. "I've been made a senior accountant at the firm," I said. "It's a big promotion with a lot more responsibility." My mother nodded vaguely. "That's nice, dear. More money too, I imagine." The transparent inquiry made my resolve strengthen. "Yes, but I've been thinking about my financial situation. I've been supporting myself and sending money home for 4 years now, and I need to start building my own security." My father frowned. "Security? You're young, no kids, good job. We're the ones with the struggling business and house payments." "And I've been helping with that," I reminded him. "I've sent over $50,000 since I graduated. That's a down payment on a house. I'll never have retirement savings I'm not building." The table fell uncomfortably silent. Jackson stared at his plate, suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes. "Well," my father said finally, "family helps family. Your brother is working on a business that will support us all eventually." "His fourth business in as many years," I pointed out. "What happened to the others? Where did all that investment go?" "Startups are risky," my mother interjected. "You can't expect immediate success. Not everyone can have a safe, boring job like accounting." The familiar dismissal stung, but I pressed on. "I understand risk, but at some point we need to acknowledge patterns. I'm not questioning whether family should help family. I'm questioning whether I'm the only one expected to make sacrifices." My father's face reddened. "Your brother has vision. He's taking bold chances while you count other people's money. He's always had that special something, that spark that makes people take notice. And you've always been—" My mother paused, searching for words. "Well, reliable. That's your strength." "What your mother means," my father added with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes, "is that you'll never be as good as your brother in the ways that really count. But that's okay. Every family needs a steady earner." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt something snap inside me, not in a breaking way, but in a breaking free way. Years of therapy had prepared me for this moment, had helped me see that their assessment wasn't truth, but a narrative they needed to believe. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched plate. The room seemed to still as I looked directly at my father. "Then tell him to pay all the bills," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I'm not sending money anymore." My parents exchanged glances. My mother's face registered confusion, then alarm. "What money?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. "We never received a single dollar from you." The room fell completely silent. Jackson abruptly stood up, muttering about getting another beer, but my father grabbed his arm, forcing him back into his seat. "What does she mean?" he demanded, looking from me to Jackson and back again. My mind was reeling. "The transfers," I said. "Every month for 4 years. Mortgage help, property taxes, utility bills, store expenses. Over $58,000 total." My mother's face had gone pale. "Robert, we never got any money from Seraphina. Not once." All eyes turned to Jackson, who was now studying the ceiling as if architectural details had suddenly become fascinating. "Jackson?" My father's voice was dangerous now. "Is there something you need to tell us?" The room felt charged with a strange electricity as we all waited for Jackson to speak. His eyes darted around, looking everywhere but at us. His usual confidence evaporated. "It's complicated," he finally muttered. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, opening my banking app. "I have records of every transfer, $58,400 over 4 years. I placed the phone on the table, sliding it toward my mother. "The first one was in May 2021, $500 when Dad said you couldn't make the mortgage payment." My mother scrolled through the transaction history, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. "Robert, we never saw any of this money." She looked up at me, tears forming in her eyes. "Seraphina, I swear to you, we never knew you were sending anything." My father's face had turned from red to a dangerous purple. "Jackson," he said, his voice low and controlled, "explain yourself, now." Jackson sighed dramatically, as if he were the victim of some great misunderstanding. "Dad asked me to help with the finances a few years ago, remember? When you were stressed about the store, I was handling the online banking, the bill payments. And intercepting money from your sister," my father finished. Jackson shrugged. "I saw the transfers coming in. Times were tough for me too, and I had business expenses." "Business expenses?" I echoed in disbelief. "I was eating ramen noodles 4 nights a week to send money home, and you used it for your failed businesses. Or was it the Miami vacation, the new truck, the Rolex?" My mother gasped, looking between Jackson and me. "What Miami vacation?" The next hour was excruciating as the full extent of Jackson's deception unraveled. He had indeed been handling my parents' online banking as their business struggled, a task they'd gratefully handed over as technology wasn't their strong suit. When my first transfer arrived, he simply didn't tell them. And when more came, he redirected the funds to his own accounts. "I was going to pay it back when the businesses took off," he insisted. "It was an investment in all our futures." My father's reaction was complicated. There was genuine anger at the deception, but even now, he couldn't help making excuses for his son. "He didn't mean any harm," he said at one point. "He just got in over his head." "Over his head with $58,000 of my money," I replied coldly. "Money I sent because you told me you were about to lose your home, the store, everything." My mother was weeping now, repeating, "We didn't know, Seraphina. You have to believe we didn't know." And strangely, I did believe them. Their shock seemed genuine. But it raised an even more painful question. If they had known I was sending money all this time, would anything have been different? Would they have finally seen my value, or would Jackson still have been the golden child, just with a different narrative to explain away the inequality? The dinner was thoroughly ruined. Jackson eventually stormed out after my father demanded he create a repayment plan, shouting that no one in this family had ever believed in him. The irony was so thick it would have been laughable in any other circumstance. Left with my parents, I felt hollow. The revelation had vindicated me. In one sense, I wasn't crazy. There really had been a massive deception, but opened new wounds in another. Years of sacrifice for what? To fund my brother's lifestyle while being told I wasn't as special as him. "I need some air," I said, finally grabbing my coat. "I'm going to a hotel tonight. I'll come back tomorrow to talk." Seraphina, please? My mother began, but my father placed a hand on her arm. Let her go, he said quietly. We owe her that much. Driving through my hometown in the dark, past the high school where I'd never quite belonged, past the park where Jackson's baseball triumphs were still mentioned years later, I felt strangely detached. It was as if I was watching someone else's life unravel, someone else's family implode. At the Holiday Inn off the highway, I checked in mechanically and called Ryan. It's worse than I thought, I told him, my voice surprisingly steady. Jackson took all the money. They never even knew I was sending it. Ryan's outrage on my behalf was comforting, but also highlighted how accustomed I'd become to having my boundaries violated. That's criminal, Sarah. You could press charges. I don't want to press charges against my brother, I said, though the thought had flickered through my mind. I just want to be free of this whole dynamic. What are you going to do? He asked. I stared at the generic hotel artwork on the wall. I don't know yet, but I know I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done trying to earn love that should have been freely given. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time, letting the full weight of the day settle over me. There was grief for the family. I'd never really had anger at years of manipulation, and underneath it all, a strange sense of liberation. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally been spoken. The family myth had cracked open, revealing the rot beneath. Tomorrow would require difficult conversations and hard boundaries. But tonight, in this anonymous hotel room, I allowed myself to feel everything, without judgment, the loss, the rage, the tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, something more authentic could emerge from these ashes. The next morning, I arrived at my parents' house just after 9, having barely slept. The house was unusually quiet, no television, no coffee percolating, none of the morning sounds I associated with home. My mother answered the door in her robe, eyes puffy and red. Jackson's gone, she said before I could speak. He left a note saying he needs to figure things out and took some clothes. Your father's been up all night. I found my father at the kitchen table staring into a cold cup of coffee. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. The lines in his face deeper, his shoulders hunched. For the first time, I saw him not as the intimidating patriarch who'd shaped my self-worth, but as an aging man facing the consequences of his choices. Dad, I said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. He looked up, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite name, shame perhaps, or regret. I don't know what to say to you, Seraphina. It was possibly the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. We need to talk about what happened, I replied. All of it, not just the money, but the years before that too. My mother joined us, clutching her robe around herself like armor. We never meant to hurt you, she began. But you did, I said simply. Over and over again. Jackson was always the golden child, and I was... what? The reliable one? The responsible one? The one who was never quite good enough? My father shifted uncomfortably. We didn't see it that way. How did you see it then? I asked, genuine curiosity replacing some of the anger. Help me understand. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Initially defensive, my parents gradually began to acknowledge patterns they'd never examined, how they'd placed Jackson on a pedestal, how they'd taken my achievements for granted, how they'd created a family dynamic where one child could thrive only at the expense of the other. He just needed more, my father said at one point. He was struggling in school with friends. We thought if we built him up enough, you thought if you built him up enough, he'd become the son you wanted. I finished. Meanwhile, I was achieving everything you should have wanted, and it was never enough. My mother began to cry again. We were wrong, Seraphina. I see that now. We failed you both. The admission was startling in its clarity. I'd come prepared for more deflection, more excuses, more of the same dynamics that had defined our family for decades. Their willingness to acknowledge the truth, at least some of it, caught me off guard. As the morning stretched into afternoon, we peeled back layers of family mythology. My parents revealed the extent of their financial troubles. The hardware store had been barely breaking even for years, undermined by big box competition. They'd remortgaged the house not once, but twice, to fund Jackson's ventures and were now at risk of foreclosure. "We thought his businesses would save us all," my father admitted. "I couldn't face that my own business was failing, so I pinned everything on his success." "That was unfair to him too," I pointed out. "He's never had to develop real skills or perseverance because you've cushioned every failure." My mother nodded slowly. "We thought we were showing love. Now I wonder if we were just afraid. Afraid of facing our own disappointments, afraid of watching our children struggle." The conversation shifted to practical matters. I made it clear that I would no longer be sending money, a boundary that felt both terrifying and necessary to establish. Instead, I offered to connect them with a financial counselor who specialized in small businesses and retirement planning. "You need to understand where you actually stand," I explained. "No more magical thinking about Jackson's next big idea saving everyone." My father looked like he wanted to argue but simply nodded instead. It was the first time I could remember him accepting my expertise in anything. As we talked, I realized my parents were facing their own painful awakening. The son they'd idolized had betrayed their trust profoundly. The daughter they'd undervalued had been their actual support all along. Their world had been upended as surely as mine had. Around 4 o'clock, the front door opened and Jackson walked in. He'd clearly expected us to be elsewhere and froze when he saw the three of us at the kitchen table, tear-stained and serious. "I just came to get some more stuff," he said, already retreating. "Sit down, Jackson," my father said with a firmness I rarely heard him use with my brother. "We're not done here." What followed was another difficult confrontation. Jackson cycled through his usual tactics: charm, deflection, victim playing, but found them ineffective against our united front of truth. When he realized he couldn't manipulate his way out, he finally admitted to the full extent of his deception. "I needed the money more than you did," he told me as if this justified everything. "You were doing fine in your fancy city job. You have no idea what sacrifices I made to send that money," I replied. "You stole from me, and you let me believe our parents were getting help they desperately needed." Eventually, we established terms. Jackson would create a formal repayment plan for the money he'd taken. He would move out of our parents' house within 30 days. He would seek career counseling to find legitimate employment rather than jumping into another doomed venture. My parents, for their part, committed to financial counseling and to selling their oversized house for something more manageable. They acknowledged that their enabling had harmed both their children in different ways. As for me, I made it clear that our relationship would need to be rebuilt on new terms. "I love you," I told them, "but I won't be the family scapegoat anymore. I won't fund Jackson's lifestyle. I won't accept being valued less than him. Those days are over." The conversation was exhausting but clarifying. For the first time, I felt seen by my family, not completely, not perfectly, but more truly than ever before. As I prepared to return to Chicago the next day, I realized I was leaving more than just my hometown behind. I was leaving behind a version of myself I'd outgrown: the perpetual second-place child, the reliable financial crutch, the one who accepted less than she deserved. Walking out of that house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, is rebuilt slowly. But for the first time, I was walking it as my full self, not as the shadow of my brother. 6 months after that life-changing Thanksgiving, I sat in my new apartment overlooking Chicago's lakeshore, reflecting on how much had changed. The promotion I'd received had come with another salary increase, allowing me to finally move into a space that felt like a home rather than a temporary shelter. Ryan and I had moved in together, merging our lives in ways that still sometimes scared me. Having never witnessed a truly healthy relationship growing up, I found myself watching for signs of the same dysfunction that had marked my family. But Ryan's steady presence and unwavering support were slowly teaching me that love doesn't have to come with conditions or comparisons. My relationship with my family had entered a new phase, one marked by cautious honesty rather than the old patterns of denial and manipulation. Our communication was limited, but more authentic than it had ever been. My parents had followed through on their commitments. They'd sold the house where I'd grown up and moved into a modest condo that better suited their retirement needs. The financial counselor I'd connected them with had helped them create a sustainable budget and plan for the future without depending on either of their children. My father had ultimately decided to close the hardware store, accepting what he'd been denying for years, that the business was no longer viable. Instead, he'd taken a position managing a local garden center work that utilized his knowledge without the financial pressures of ownership. My mother had returned to part-time work as a receptionist at a medical office, something she claimed was just to get out of the house, but that I suspected also provided welcome financial independence. Jackson's path had been rockier. After moving out of our parents' house as agreed, he'd cycled through several short-lived jobs before finally finding some stability at a sports marketing firm. He'd begun making small, irregular payments toward what he'd taken from me, far from the formal repayment plan we'd established, but at least an acknowledgement of the debt. Our relationship remained strained. While I'd let go of my active anger, trust would take much longer to rebuild if it ever could be. We communicated mostly through terse text messages, occasionally finding moments of the sibling connection we might have had if our parents had fostered equality rather than competition. My own healing journey continued through therapy. Dr. Lindsay had helped me understand that, while I couldn't change my past, I could change how it affected my present and future. Family patterns run deep, she'd explained in one session. Breaking them requires conscious effort every day. You'll find yourself slipping into old roles automatically, particularly under stress. The key is to notice when it's happening and make a different choice. She'd been right. Even months after establishing boundaries, I sometimes found myself overcome with guilt when my parents mentioned financial challenges, my finger hovering over the banking app before I caught myself. The conditioning to be the responsible one, the fixer, the provider had been so thoroughly ingrained that undoing it was daily work. Ryan noticed these moments and gently reminded me of my worth beyond what I could give materially. Your value isn't in what you provide, he'd say. It's in who you are. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Ryan had proposed, presenting a modest but beautiful ring and a promise of partnership based on equality and respect. My immediate instinct had been fear of repeating my parents' dysfunctional patterns, fear of someday comparing our children to each other, fear of failing at the most important relationship in my life. I need time, I'd told him honestly. I love you, but I'm still learning how to be in a healthy relationship. His response had been characteristic of the man he was. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. We'd begun couples counseling not because our relationship was troubled, but because I wanted tools to ensure we built something stronger than what I'd grown up witnessing. Together, we discussed how we would handle finances, how we would communicate during conflict, how we would maintain our individual identities within our partnership. And 2 months ago, I'd said yes, confident that while I didn't have perfect role models for marriage, I had the awareness and commitment to create something better. In April, my parents asked if they could visit Chicago, the first time they'd ever suggested coming to see my world, rather than expecting me to return to theirs. I'd agreed with trepidation, wondering if old patterns would reassert themselves on my home territory. Their visit was awkward, but meaningful. My father, seeing my office during a lunch visit, had appeared genuinely impressed by my professional accomplishments. My mother, touring our apartment, had commented on my decorating taste without a single comparison to anyone else's home. Small moments perhaps, but significant shifts in a relationship that had been defined by what I wasn't, rather than what I was. The most profound moment had come on their last evening as we sat in a restaurant overlooking the city lights. My father, after 2 glasses of wine, had looked at me with unusual directness. "I'm sorry, Seraphina," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you. Always was. You're not just as good as your brother. You're extraordinary in your own right." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. They didn't erase the past, couldn't undo the years of feeling second best, but they created space for something new to grow. My mother had reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "We're trying to know the real you," she'd said, "not who we thought you should be." The process of family healing was far from complete. There would be backsliding old habits, reasserting themselves, new boundaries needed. But for the first time, I believed that authentic relationship might be possible, not the perfect family of my childhood dreams, but something real and honest. As I sat in my apartment that evening, watching the sun set over the lake, I reflected on the lessons of the past 6 months. I'd learned that sometimes the healthiest love requires the hardest boundaries, that family patterns don't break easily, but they can break. That my worth was never about comparison to anyone else, it simply was intrinsic and complete. The journey from seeking approval to finding self-respect had been painful but necessary. In standing up for myself that Thanksgiving Day, I'd not only reclaimed my financial independence, but also my sense of self. The truth, however difficult, had ultimately set all of us free to build something more authentic. Perhaps the most profound realization was that healing family wounds isn't about perfect reconciliation or fairy tale endings. It's about honest acknowledgement of harm, conscious choices to change patterns, and the courage to love oneself enough to demand better. Have you ever had to break a family pattern to find healing? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to stand in our truth, even when it feels like we're standing alone. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and self-discovery. And remember, your worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion. It's your birthright, undiminished and complete. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be gentle with yourself on your own healing journey.